Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Well, it is getting pretty scary out there. So the coronavirus has now officially become a pandemic. It is spreading throughout pretty much, I think, most countries and most regions of the world. So we obviously talked about the coronavirus earlier, a couple months back, and I was tracking it pretty closely in China. In terms of the box office, they closed down every single movie theater in China to create social distancing and prevent the virus from spreading. It's a viral pneumonia virus that, doesn't kill a majority of the people that get it, like Ebola or something like that, but it's dangerous enough where 20% of people have to be hospitalized and incubated. And then, the death rate's around 2 to 3%, which doesn't sound super high, but it's actually a catastrophic sort of pandemic that is possible here if countries don't take pretty extreme measures to create distance between people, because it's actually very contagious. So what we saw in China is now spreading out throughout the world. We saw it in Italy next really sort of take over. All of Italy is now shut down in terms of, people aren't really going to work. All the bars, restaurants, movie theaters have all been closed. And I think we're probably about a week or two away from that here in the United States and Canada. We're just not really testing a lot of people, so I don't think we know how bad it is here, unfortunately. Our government's response will be historically awful, I think, when people look back at this. They've really failed us. So I don't, domestically at the box office, it is a pretty crazy weekend. There's a couple of quotes from different articles that I just kind of wanted to read out to give you an idea of what's happening. This is from Variety, sort of their box office weekend recap. Ticket sales in North America hit the lowest levels in over 2 decades, generating roughly $55.3 million during the 3-day stretch. Only one movie, Disney Pixar's Onward, made more than $10 million for the weekend. The last time revenues were this depressed was a weekend in mid-September of 2000, where it was $54.5 million. The steep decline pushed the year-to-date box office down almost 9%, according to ComScore. So this is a pretty dramatic downswing. And keep in mind, we're not to full shutdown, obviously, here with movie theaters in the United States. It's kind of spotty and regional by city, municipality, and state. This is what Hollywood Reporter had to say about the shutdowns that happened this weekend. On Saturday, the grim prospect that cinemas will begin to close on a widespread basis began unfolding as local authorities in 2 Pennsylvania and New Jersey counties ordered that movie theaters close their doors, including at least 10 AMC locations and a handful of Regal sites. Separately, some houses in New York City, including Alamo Drafthouse in Brooklyn and Yonkers, on the Film Forum have gone dark. There were also some closures in hard-hit Seattle area, Maryland, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. My guess is that this will continue to get worse in the United States. I think most schools are going to close, and I think we'll get to the point, and it may be down to city by city, state by state, but I'm almost positive most movie theaters are going to be closed. Maybe not by next weekend, but I think by the weekend after, as this virus spreads and people begin to really understand how serious it is. I think for a lot of younger people, they're hearing, older people with an underlying illness are the ones that end up dying from it. But they're not hearing the 20% that have to be incubated, literally a tube put into your throat so you can breathe. That will overwhelm the healthcare industry, and that's people of all ages that get that serious critical condition. 80% of the people who experience it have pretty mild symptoms. I mean, it may be like a very severe flu for some people, but for the unlucky people who are older people or people with underlying conditions, it is quite a serious illness. And I think the terrifying thing about it is how contagious it really is. So social distancing is just going to become the norm for probably the next 2 months here in North America. And that means the box office is basically going to collapse completely. So it's going to be a weird show, I think, for a while. I'll keep doing the show as long as there's movies played and stuff. And maybe if they do fully shut down, we'll find something, an alternative. Maybe we'll do historical box office shows and talk about historic runs like Titanic or maybe Jumanji. I think that would be a lot of fun, but we'll find a way to keep the show going because I love doing it. So in any event, let's talk about this depressed weekend. This will be the weekend of March 13th through today, March 15th. Like Variety and Hollywood Reporter were saying, pretty much a complete collapse. People are not showing up. Theaters are closing. But let's see actually what happened here. So number one was Onward, the second weekend from the Pixar film. It's at 10.5 million, so $60 million so far for this movie. Obviously, 73% drop is insane. So what would I like? A 73% drop would be, it's never normal, even for like a terrible horror film, which have the worst drops. This would be like a Freddy versus Jason drop, I want to say, or the Friday the 13th remake. But I think those were more like high 60s, like 68. A 73% drop is insane, which I think it makes sense because of the virus and, families going out. They don't want to get infected. So I think people are really terrified right now. So the 73% drop makes sense with all of that. It sucks for that movie because it didn't start out very strong and now it's going to go nowhere. $60 million here domestically, worldwide, it's sitting at 101. It's interesting. Disney made the decision to push out Frozen 2 early because of the virus and because people can't go out to movie theaters, which I thought was pretty interesting. They pushed it out on Disney Plus early, which is kind of a big move. One of the things that's going to happen from all this is, and there's a good article, I think it was on Variety, that the movie theater business will never be the same. And I think it was already going through some pretty paradigm shift level changes over the last 5 years. But with the virus and what's happening, the social distancing that's going to happen over the next couple of months, I think we're going to see total realignment of the industry. And it may not, I don't think it'll ever be like it was now or it was 10, 15 years ago. It's going to be totally different. And streaming is going to sort of be even more ascendant than it was before. It was already sort of constantly peaking and cresting over the last few years, but that crest is going to get bigger and wider. And like the early release of Frozen 2 is kind of an example of that. You want to engage people, you want to entertain them. And if you can't entertain them in a movie theater, then you do it at home. And I think Disney made a smart move on that. So Onward essentially collapsing because of the virus. You're not going to make hardly any money. It's going to be a loss without a doubt at this point, just because there's no real markets that are going to come back anytime soon. I think China will probably be the first one back. I'm not even sure what the status of their movie theaters are, but I'm almost positive they're still closed. From a supply chain manufacturing perspective, because I kind of work somewhat in that industry, China is coming back. It's probably like 50%, at least in my line of work. 50 to 60% back. So they are returning to normal, but it's been 2 months of like a total shutdown. We'll see when the movie theaters come back on, but it's not going to help Onward. I think that movie's done, unfortunately. So that's number one spot, just over $10 million. Number two, we do have a new wide release, I still believe, from Lionsgate. Let me kind of give you the Rotten Tomatoes byline on this one. From the makers of I Can Only Imagine comes the true life story of a Christian music megastar, Jeremy Camp, and his remarkable journey of love and loss that proves there is always hope in midst of tragedy, and that faith tested is the only faith worth sharing. God, what a great little byline there. PG movie, Christian film. Critics didn't really like it all that much. 43% from all critics, 13% from top critics. Actual score from critics was 55. Top critics was 36. But then, with Christian films in general, and we talked about this a lot, if you can target a film to a very specific group of people, I guarantee you 80% of the tickets for this were pre-bought by church groups. The verified audience score, as of right now, which was Sunday morning-ish, 99%. So people that bought a ticket on Fandango, rated this movie, 99%. It's theoretically perfect, essentially. It's a theoretical limit of a positive score. So 97 actual score. All audience 96% fresh, 95 actual score. So like that's not that big of a difference at all. A cinema score of an A, post track of a 90%. But then when you sort of get out of like, it's like you have the critics who are these like art critics who like, liberal arts school, probably more on the progressive side of things, maybe not super religious. And then you have like Letterboxd people, which I think are kind of, there's a big sort of crossover between the film critics and Letterboxd people. They gave it a 56 out of 100, which is terrible. They gave I Only Imagine 64. And like the thing about this is that like these are critic proof movies and it's film snob proof. These aren't necessarily films meant to be, well, every film is meant to be criticized on some level. I mean, art criticism doesn't really sort of pick and choose what's worthy of criticism. I mean, not in the last 30 years it hasn't. Maybe before that they did. But so a movie like this could be sort of analyzed and criticized and run through different critical lenses to see what ideologies it's proposing. It's a Christian film, though, at the end of the day. In terms of the entertainment value, it's only meant for that group of people. It's not meant for a wide audience that's outside the Christian group. The Christian group is massive. It's not even really meant for casual Christians either. It's meant for a very specific subset of Christianity, usually fundamentalists, and evangelicals, right? So those two cross over a lot. So they are all about spreading the good news. They're all about spreading the values and views of Jesus Christ and getting other people to sort of believe in their system of thought. So, a movie like this is a perfect example of doing that. And I think that, what it actually made this weekend, 9.5 million was the take, even in the depressed sort of situation that we're in right now. Per theater average was 2,900, which is not great. This thing only cost, what did it cost? 14 million? Yeah, low teens before P&A is what Deadline is saying. So, even in this situation, the problem is this going to play outside the United States? I don't really know if it's going to. I'll have to look up I can only imagine. That was a huge hit, by the way. I can only imagine. I remember following that one a couple years back. That was a really well done movie in terms of hitting the right audience. And let me see if it's so funny. It's under the franchise I Can Only Imagine. Apparently that's a franchise now. It's a Christian cinematic universe. That I Can Only Imagine came out 2018. Geez, that was only 2 years ago. It feels like 20 years ago. That opened at 17, closed out at 83. Worldwide box office of 85. So there is zero worldwide audience for this. It is US and Canada only for these. I'm imagining this will be the same. Where's this thing going to end up? We don't know. Like, we just don't even know if movie theaters are going to be open next week. So this could be it this weekend and next. I'm sure all these people are going to go out to St. Patty's Day and get drunk and spread the virus everywhere because they're absolute fucking idiots. So I'm assuming the virus is going to get horrifically worse over the next 2 weeks here. So I don't think the box office is going to be open. So this thing may make back its money at the box office like 1-to-1, but of course that's not actually 1-to-1 because the studio only gets 50% here in the US and Canada. So, let's say it hits $15 million by the end of this week. It only actually takes home 7.5 million. So it's not going to recoup its production costs with the box office take, I don't think. Unless the virus miraculously disappears, which it's not going to. So ultimately, it is an underperformance because of the situation. Who showed up to this? 79% were over 25, 21% were under 25. That is an over representation of the over 25 audience. Males were 36%, females were 64%. Average movie going on is about 55% male. So huge over index on females and over 25 audience here, which makes sense concerning the subject matter of the film. It looks pretty good to me, actually. I kind of want to see this. I'm a big music guy. I'm not really a Christian per se. I'm definitely more of an atheist. But there's something about these, I don't know, there's something about the Christian film sometimes, and I think the rom-coms in general, it's more of like a romance film, where it is so genre tight in the sense that it follows the convention so well. It's almost sort of curious to see like how it's going to get from, a story point A, story point B that are in all these movies. Like, how is it going to get there? I know it's going to get there. I know he's going to end up falling in love and marrying somebody, and it's going to be a great, huge Christian wedding. But it's like, how do they get there? What's the actual story? So I don't know. I find those genre conventions really fascinating. So I'll probably see this movie. I also love romance films. Okay, enough about me. Number 3 this weekend was Bloodshot, 9.3 million. This one I think had a chance to open pretty big because of the virus, I think is a very depressed audience here. 9.3 million is terrible for a movie like this. 3,200 per theater average. What did the critics think on this one? Not good. 31% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 20% from top critics. Actual scores of 47, 48. So critics hated it. Verified audience score 78%, not good. Actual score 82%. All audience very similar. Similar score of a B, not good. Post track 60%, not good. Definitely recommend 45%, terrible. Letterbox 46%, awful. There's no good news here. This is not a good movie. It wasn't well produced. It wasn't well marketed. Obviously the final product, I don't even know what the hell the thing is about. Let's read the byline. from Rotten Tomatoes. Based on the best-selling comic book, Vin Diesel stars as Ray Garrison, a soldier recently killed in action and brought back to life as the superhero Bloodshot by the RST Corporation. With an army of nanotechnology in his veins, he's an unstoppable force, stronger than ever and able to heal instantly. But in controlling his body, the company has sway over his mind and memories too. Now Ray doesn't know what's real and what's not, but he's on a mission to find out. They're really great at writing these like summaries. This is awesome. PG-13, so it's not super hard in terms of violence. I don't know. The release date was really strange on this one. You know, March was supposed to be a blockbuster month according to the last few years, but this year it hasn't been, and now it's certainly not going to be with the coronavirus sort of shutting down everything. This thing cost $45 million to make. In terms of Letterboxd, 46% compared to like his other sort of, I would say, tier B, tier C action movies Vin Diesel's in. Fate of the Furious is obviously like top shelf, supposed to be top shelf, but Fate of the Furious, the last one, was a 58 on Letterboxd, which I think is a pretty accurately accurate score for that one. That movie's horrifically bad. Triple X back in 2002, 50 out of 100 on Letterboxd. Triple X Return of Xander Cage, 46 out of 100. So it's kind of right in line with the worst stuff that he does. So it's not that surprising that people are not showing up, virus or not virus. So like I said, 45% production cost, which is pretty low for a movie like this. It would be a total disaster if they tried to make this for like $150 million, which they could have done. But I think Columbia Pictures was smart here in sort of keeping the budget way low. It's kind of a small bet. It's not like a $5 million Blumhouse bet. And we'll get to The Hunt, which is coming up next, where, you know, if those go wrong, it's not the end of the world. But in this case, you know, I think Bloodshot's it's definitely a failure. It's not a massive flop. It's definitely a flop. But it's also not like a push. Like if this is a Blumhouse movie, it might have been a push at the $9 million, depending on if the box office stays open. But this thing's definitely going to be a loss for Columbia. Under 25 audience was 27%. Over 25 was 73%. So over indexed on the over 25, and 72% male, 28% female. It's hard to win when you have that out of balanced an audience in terms of gender. That's insane. That's like worse than a rom-com would be if the females were in the lead there. I mean, it doesn't bode well for a movie doing well when just men are showing up essentially. Okay, so that was number 3, Bloodshot at 9.3 million, just below I Still Believe at 9.5. The Invisible Man in its third weekend, which is a great movie. Go out and see it. I really love it. $6 million, a 60% drop. Speaking of like small bets here, $7 million production budget. Don't forget that when you see it. It does not look like a $7 million movie. They certainly found ways, you know, she's in the same outfit the entire time. It doesn't go a lot of different places. Really, it's really in that house for a while and stuff like that. So they found ways around having a big budget, but it is one of the best shot films I've ever seen for $7 million. It looks like a $15 million movie easily. $6 million this weekend, a 60% drop. Obviously, a lot of that's the virus. $1,600 per theater. So it's at $64 million right now here in the US and Canada, up to $122 million right now worldwide. Not too bad for a $7 million production. Obviously, print and advertising and the marketing budget there was pretty significant, but like this thing is going to be printing money as long as the box office stays open the next couple of weeks. Okay, another sort of bet. So Universal was part of that deal with Blumhouse where Blumhouse makes it for $7 million, but Universal then distributes it. I'm not sure how the distribution costs and marketing costs are shared there, but I'm sure Universal fronts a ton of money for the marketing and then gets a ton of the back end on it. The Hunt, also sort of a similar partnership there from Blumhouse Universal. This one got pushed back last year. I honestly can't remember why. I could have read that, but I didn't. It was a mass shooting. We have mass shootings every week in the United States now. It's basically like when it rains. I know that's terrible to say, but that's the reality of the situation here. It's horrific and awful. But that's what's happening. So The Hunt got canceled because there's some political sort of undercurrent to it. Let's just go ahead and read the byline on that one so we have an idea what the hell this thing's about. 12 strangers wake up in a clearing. They don't know where they are or how they got there. They don't know why they've been chosen for a very specific purpose. The Hunt. In the shadow of a dark internet conspiracy theory, a group of global elitists gather for the very first time at a remote manor house to hunt humans for sport. But the elite's master plan is about to be derailed by one of the hunted, Crystal, Betty Gilpin. Oh, she's from Gilpin from Glow. Knows the hunter's game better than they do. She turns the tables on the killers, picking them off one by one as she makes her way towards the mysterious woman. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Whatever. So it's basically The Most Dangerous Game. A remake, take off of that. Maybe a little bit of Ready or Not, which came out last year. I thought that was kind of interesting. You had 2 human hunting movies that were coming out pretty similar time frames, almost within a couple of weeks of each other, I want to say. But then The Hunt got pushed out. Rotten Tomatoes 54%, 43% from top critics, verified audience 65%, terrible. All audience also 65% awful. Cinema score terrible. C+. Post track, I did not see a post track on this one. I definitely recommend. Deadline usually puts that in there, but they didn't up for this movie, probably because it wasn't important enough. In terms of where it's sitting, I guess this would be like a horror thriller film. It sits at 62 score on Letterboxd. Comparing to the recent horror sort of disasters we've had. Fantasy Island was a 38, Turning was 34, Good Old Hansel was a 56, Grunge was 32, Black Christmas was 40. So this one's it's better than that terrible crop of films that we had to start the year out in the horror genre. It's more in line with like a Dr. Sleep at a 70 and more in line with Invisible Man, although not as high as those two. So this one, kind of died on the vine, essentially got pushed back, was going to get canceled and just put on VOD, but then like, hey, let's put this thing out. Then of course they release it during the worst weekend ever to release a film. So 5.3 million for the weekend for The Hunt, $1,700 per theater. This one, it's not going anywhere. It's not going to make any money. It is definitely DOA, which I think, I don't know. It seemed like a pretty cool premise and pretty fascinating. And I think in a different environment, they should have just held the release last year when it was coming out, and they didn't. And now they're not going to lose money. But like, I think the production on this one was not your normal Blumhouse 5 million deal. Invisible Man was a little bit higher than normal at 7 million. I heard this one's like what, $14 million production budget. It's got some stars in it too. So this is one of those situations where they bet a little bit more than they usually do. Now they're going to lose something on it. Maybe it makes it up in VOD and streaming rights, but I doubt it. The thing about like all those valuations is all the like what you get for streaming rights, what you get for TV rights, cable, basic cable, that kind of stuff. All really depends on the popularity of the film. Like it's, pricing a film is incredibly subjective. So what do you go off of? You have to go off of the box office. Like that's what makes the most sense. And so if the subjective value, it's like basically like a marketplace. So the value of The Hunt is not worth much now because it's opened at 5.3 million. It could make, 10 total if the box office shuts down here in the next week or so. So not a good win, but the loss there is going to be made up for the win of Invisible Man. That's why the Blumhouse model works. You throw out, 10 films at 5 million each or something or close to that. And like 3 of them win big, 1 wins huge, and the rest are losers, or, and you still come out way on top. So the model does work for them. Number 6 this weekend was the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. Paramount, 2.5 million, 67% drop. Yeah, we're seeing mostly 67 to 70% drops across the board. Lost 600 theaters, $800 per theater average, $145 million for Sonic the Hedgehog. That's a win. At the last sort of lap of this one, it's in its 5th week, and the last lap here is getting cut off pretty significantly. I think normally a film makes, I want to say about 85% of its total box office in the first 4 weeks of release. So it's past that now, but it could have had some gravy and a cherry on top here in the box office run. That's not going to happen because of the virus. The Way Back was number 7, a 70% drop. Ouch. 2.4 million. $900 per theater, 13.4 million total, 2.4 million this weekend. I don't think there's any international audience for this one. I feel bad for this movie because I thought it was pretty good. I saw it opening weekend. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's a great film, but if you just enjoy movies and you enjoy adult dramas, I think it was pretty good. And it's got Ben Affleck. He's good in it. He's great maybe in some scenes, but the supporting cast is phenomenal. And so I don't know. It sucks. It's like, where's the space for this type of movie? Throw out the virus stuff aside. This thing opened way low last weekend anyway. So, where does a film like this fit in the box office? I think there is a place for it, but it's like, you just have to have, a different set of parameters for success here, which means you have to produce it at a much lower rate. And I just don't think you can release this movie out of the multiplex in a mall. I think that, we were talking about the big shifts in the industry that are going to happen, that were already happening, but because of the virus and the box office going to be shut down, I guarantee it, all movie theaters are going to be, for the most part, shut down here for at least a couple of weeks, I would imagine. In terms of a movie like The Way Back, does it fit into some new model? I think that it does. But it's not like, if you view it right now, there's sort of the mall multiplex model, which has been really in place, I want to say, since like the mid 90s, when like I started to go a lot to movies when I was a teenager. That's where they're like building tons of new movie theaters, 15 screens, 12 screens, somewhere in that range. That was kind of the model. You have that thing going, and then you have the art house model, which is like old theaters in downtown locations that play mostly art films and foreign films. And you have these sort of two different business models going on at once in the industry. And the mall multiplex obviously makes a ton more money. It is everywhere. I feel like that is going to start to fade a bit. I don't think the art house theaters are really going to go anywhere. I think those are always going to be around as a place to see different, more artistically rich films and foreign films that you would never get necessarily in a mall multiplex. But I think a movie like The Way Back, like, where does that fit? It's not really an art film per se, and it's not really a mall multiplex film. So there's got to be some place for a film like that in the middle ground. And I think we're going to see more sort of neighborhood theaters that aren't necessarily art films, that play stuff like, Back to the Future at midnight, kind of the Alamo Drafthouse model, but less sort of big and bold like they are, like in Brooklyn and, like those big, huge movie palaces that they're making. They're making one here in St. Louis too. Maybe less like that and something smaller and a little bit more intimate and a little bit more meant for, the surrounding 5 miles as opposed to the surrounding 50 miles. So, I don't know. That's my thought process on that. Like, I think like a movie like The Way Back could win in a new model. That's in between the art house and the multiplex. So maybe that'll come to fruition. Maybe it won't. Maybe like The Way Back type of movies are just meant for HBO or something. I don't know. I just like streaming. That was number 7. Number 8 was Call of the Wild. In its 4th weekend, that movie feels like it's been out for a long time. 2.2 million, 67% drop. Since that's $62 million, it's going to be a massive loss, I think, for 20th Century Fox. They spent way too much money on it. $170 million worldwide. Yeah, it's definitely not going to make money. Rounding out the top 10 here, Emma at 9 and Bad Boys for Life at 10. Emma did 1.3 million, 71% drop. It's done 10 million so far. Again, focused feature film, kind of art house movie. Again, going back to the art house multiplex sort of dichotomy that exists right now. This one was definitely more on the art house side, but also like kind of like, so almost like Poptimist, if you will. Like, it seemed very colorful, very bright, very palatable, that you could probably play in a multiplex. I know they did here in St. Louis. There's a big movie theater out in Creve Coeur that had this one. It seemed kind of weird. It was like, AMC does this artisan thing. They called The Way Back an artisan film. I was like, no, it's not. Emma definitely to some degree is. But again, it's sort of like trying to push this out to 1,700 theaters. Does that make any sense? Is there an audience for it in 1,700 theaters? Is there an audience for it, 20 miles outside of Omaha? Like, I don't think so. So like, it's an interesting play. It didn't work here, and it usually doesn't work, but sometimes it does. I look back to like Hereditary would be an example, or The Big Sick. But those are sort of tough calls. Hereditary is like a very visceral, mood piece horror film. So like it has that horror cachet that get a normal person to go see it. And Big Sick was essentially like a rom-com, a more artistic rom-com, but a rom-com nonetheless. Both from, Big Sick was from Amazon Studios distributed, and Hereditary was from A24. So, kind of not your major players right now in distribution. So they're kind of different, but they did make a lot of money. They're like, I think it made about 40 something million. That would probably be the model for a lot of these films like Emma or The Way Back. And they just most of them aren't going to get there. Number 10 was Bad Boys for Life, 1.1 million, 64% drop, $204 million. Jumanji is outside the top 10, folks. Sitting at 316 domestic at number 12 spot. Birds of Prey is at 11, with $84 million total. That's going to lose a lot of money. That also lost 1,000 theaters. Not a terrible movie though. I kind of enjoyed Birds of Prey. It wasn't like fantastic, but it was definitely entertaining. Okay. Outside of that, we did have, oh man, this is such a bummer. We did have a limited release that was a huge I thought it was a huge story at Sundance. I picked it up on a few lists. It's on my list to see right away. And so this is a film about Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Big kind of semi-hit at Sundance. Like there was a lot of buzz behind it, but then like when you read the follow-up articles, it shows like, oh, these are the 10 best films from Sundance. They weren't in a ton of them. You had to dig deeper for this one. I just like really followed Sundance very closely, and like this one popped up immediately when it premiered, that it was like something to watch for. So Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is essentially the story of, I believe, a young woman who gets pregnant. I think she's a teenager in like central Pennsylvania, I want to say. And she has to go to New York City to get an abortion, and it's sort of all about that. I don't know. Like I thought this movie would play pretty well. 4 theaters. I'm assuming New York, Los Angeles. $4,500 per theater. People, come on. This is like this. It's so upsetting to me that like a movie like this, which I know is good and I know is interesting, I know is unique, and you can't even get people in New York City and Los Angeles to go see this. Yes, there's a virus happening. Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on, but $4,500 is indicative of nobody showing up. So maybe they just released it wrong, whatever. I guess they're going to push out to streaming. No one's going to see it on streaming because no one knows it exists. So that's why you got to have a strong box office. If you're going to do an art house release, you gotta market it somehow. You got to spend money, essentially. If you can't do it, then just push it on streaming and market it that way. But like I think Focus Features really dropped the ball on this one. So if you have a chance to see Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, please do. If it ever comes to any movie theater near me, I'm going to go see it and support it. But it'll probably be on streaming in like 3 months anyways. I think that's mostly it. Road's Not Taken from Bleecker Street. I don't know this movie at all. 3 theaters, $1,200. Yeah, I don't have a ton of details on that one. I'm also looking at Downhill. Somewhere in the back here, made $125 per theater this weekend, 8.2 million total for that disaster. Also Sundance film though, right? That was a big sort of Sundance play. The weird thing about Downhill is that the reviews were from Sundance weren't terrible. But then when they got out to general audiences and normal critics, they just ripped to shreds. So I have no idea what happened there. All right, so that is that's the top 10 with some limited releases as well. Now we got to kind of talk about like what's going to happen here, because this is kind of definitely never really happened before in the United States and Canada here with the box office and movie theater. Like what, is stuff still going to come out? There's a lot of changes, right? So all cinemas in France are closed. I'm assuming that's what's going to happen here pretty soon. Movies are getting moved all over the place. Quiet Place 2, which was supposed to open next weekend, has been pushed. The new James Bond movie has been pushed. A lot. Mulan's been pushed. Universal Studios has shut down production on all of their films. That includes the new Jurassic World movie, Flint Strong. And so the industry is coming to a little bit of a screeching halt right now. Batman halted production for 2 weeks. And so, I don't know how it's going to play out. I have no clue, what's going to happen. We can talk about what's supposed to come out next weekend, but it's just going to be tough to really even figure it out. So on, I think for the most part, Box Office Pro is basically saying, yeah, the next month is a wash. They're just looking now at like April. And not even looking at the next couple of weeks. Let's see what was scheduled to come out the next week or so. I don't even know off the top of my head. Probably talked about it a little bit before. So Bloodshot Hunt and I Still Believe with the wide releases this weekend. We're supposed to get, let's see here. It's just limited stuff. I don't see anything major coming out anytime soon. Essentially, the calendar has been cleared until April 10th. And so that's why Box Office Pro has done that. There's nothing for the rest of March that is a major release. April 10th is when the lights hopefully will come back on. Saint Maud. This was going to be the James Bond weekend, April 10th. But Saint Maud, the body horror film from A24, looks awesome, but I think it's probably not going to do very well. Trolls World 2 from Universal, also coming out the 10th. My Spy got moved to April 17th. Antebellum, Bad Trip. Antebellum looks pretty interesting, a horror film with a very sort of clear racial, I wouldn't call it undertone, maybe overtone. I don't know what you call it. That looks really fascinating from Lionsgate, April 24th. That one's sticking to its release date for right now. I guess the assumption here is that things will clear up in about a month and movie theaters can reopen. They haven't officially closed down yet, though, which I find is pretty fascinating. So they moved all these movies, but they have not totally shut down the movie theaters here in the US, Canada. And then you get into May, it should be returning back to normal. I didn't know Legally Blonde 3 was coming out. Let's do a quick little May preview because I feel like it. It's like, I'm so bummed out about this stuff. And it's like, I'm gonna keep, we'll see if I can keep doing the show the next few weeks, but there's no box office stuff. I'm not gonna sort of like force a show on you guys unless there's real data coming in, but I might do some sort of special shows over the next couple of weeks. So let's talk about May 2020. Let's talk about happy things. Black Widow comes out on May 1st, 2020. That should be a huge opening, especially if the virus has sort of played itself out a bit here in the States. Could be massive $100 million plus opening. Then you have May 8th, High Note, Legally Blonde, Run. Big movies, Woman in the Window on May 15th. Spiral from the Book of Saw on May 15th. SpongeBob movie on the 22nd. The Green Knight from A24, that looks pretty fascinating, May 29th. But I'm looking at this summer sort of schedule now. Outside of Legally Blonde 3 and maybe that Saw movie, Black Widow, of course, being a summer sort of blockbuster film, there's not a ton of traditional summer movies there. And then you get into June. Wonder Woman has not moved yet at all. It's June 5th. I think they think things are going to be returning to the way they were before. By the time we get to June, you would hope so. We just never know, though. On June 2020 is Wonder Woman 1984. That's probably going to be the biggest movie of the year. I think everybody's going to see that. I'm going to see it. $200 million opening, maybe. I mean, I think it's going to be that big. It really kind of feels that way. The week after, you have Candyman, Greenland, and Greyhound. Candyman, I think, is going to be pretty massive as well. I would expect like a $50-60 million opening, maybe higher. It does head to that sweet early June spot for that movie. So could even open to 70. Maybe it gets some like Halloween numbers. The June 19th, not a ton of stuff here. Soul, though, from Walt Disney. I missed that one. King of Staten Island. Soul, I think, could be the big winner for Walt Disney this year as an original film. Top Gun on the 24th. Top Gun Maverick, going to be massive. In the Heights is also going to be huge on the 26th there. It's going to be an interesting summer here. You got Ghostbusters Afterlife in that July 10th slot, a new Purge movie. I thought they were done with the Purge movies. I love that I'm just doing a fucking summer movie preview now because I'm bummed. Tenet on the 17th. Fuck, let's keep going. Jungle Cruise on the 24th. That'll be massive. Here's a question. Is Jungle Cruise going to have a similar run to Jumanji? Rock in the lead. Got the wonderful Emily Blunt as a lead as well. I feel like that movie is going to be huge win for Disney. Tenet on the 17th. I don't know about this Christopher Nolan movie. I love the trailer. It's got great actors in it. I think everybody's intrigued to see what it's all about, like every Christopher Nolan movie. But is it going to make like $300 million domestically? Maybe not. And then you get into August and it's kind of doldrums, except for Bill and Ted Face the Music, which is going to be awesome. But yeah, for the next month, it's going to be pretty quiet. And even when we get into April, it's not going to be much going on till honestly the end of April. Like the Antebellum release is it looks like the biggest one to me on the 24th. In any event, stay with us, stay tuned. Next week, if things are all shut down, maybe we'll do a couple of shows about historical. Maybe we'll do like extended time machine episodes where we'll talk about like big weekends in the past and sort of discuss films and how the box office has changed since then. I really should do a show on Titanic. I feel like Titanic is the one that every box office podcast needs to do at least one show on. Any event, folks, thanks for listening. Stick with us here. We'll get back into normal business soon enough. This has been the Wildline Podcast.